They basically shifted the political constitutional goalposts so that he could run in 2006. You see, it is not even the issue, in fact, of whether he can be eligible to run or not. The issue here is, does he in fact run and win a process that you consider to be a credible, a transparent, a fair and free elections? A lot of pundits say that's not really what it is. And in fact, there's a lot of evidence right there. If you looked at that evidence, you would say, wait a minute, what is happening here? It seems to me, from what I have heard, people like Yoweri Museveni, I say people like him because he's not alone really in this. There are so many people on the continent. Given how they actually ascended to power, which is seizing power with AK-47 and what have you, they tend to feel that they have a sense of entitlement. This is my beast. I am the one who killed it, and therefore it belongs to me. It is up to me to decide who takes the leg, who takes the head, the tail, and what have you. But at the end of the day, this is my thing.
A reminder that you are watching Shaka Extra Time, a show that comes to you live every Tuesday here on Facebook Live. Before we go to the comments, Shaka, I wanted to maybe to follow up on the events that happened in Parliament, the Ugandan Parliament last week, sending soldiers. Some people could argue that that's akin to maybe what Idi Amin did or Milton Obote did. How different is the scenario? How different was the scenario then? And what happened last week in the Ugandan Parliament?
I think the scenarios were pretty much similar, really, except that the interpretations probably may be different, depending on, of course, who is making the interpretation. The government, in fact, is claiming that whatever it did to send, for example, plain clothes security officials in Parliament, as far as they are concerned, was under the law. In other words, they did not violate the Constitution. But it seems to me, the little I know about the Ugandan Constitution, I am not a lawyer, mind you, but at least I am a little bit illiterate enough to be able to read that document. The only place, frankly, where you expect members of Parliament, who are called sometimes honorable, by the way, even though a lot of them probably are dishonorable, but they call them honorable. The only place where they actually can call home and do whatever they want, say whatever they say, do whatever they do, without necessarily anybody coming and saying you have violated ABC, is Parliament, is where they have immunity. There is such a thing as parliamentary immunity. But it seems to me, when you look at the circumstances in the last 31 years under President Yoweri Museveni, there is no such a thing as parliamentary immunity. This is probably the same thing that could have in fact happened under Idi Amin's watch, except that at least Idi Amin was smart enough not even to pretend to embrace democracy. For him, he said, I am a life president, whether you like it or not. But this one, on the one hand, is saying, you know, I brought you democracy. I went to Luwero for 5 years. I brought you democracy. I don't know whether he brought it in a briefcase. I don't know whether he got it from Wachtura. I don't know whether it was from Ntungamo. I don't know whether he brought it from his bank account, or if in fact he had one. But he says, I brought you democracy. And this is what you have, and you're enjoying it. And probably for that reason, I am the only guy that can guarantee that type of democracy. Surely, that does not sound like the democracy, for example, that Abraham Lincoln had in mind when he talked about a government of the people, by the people, for the people. This seems to be a different type of democracy, which is probably a government of some individuals or some people, by some people or individuals, for some people or individuals.
Along the same lines, let's go to the Facebook comments. Let us start with Frank and Wamanya from Uganda. He asks, at least last week's debacle in the Ugandan parliament, where do you see the move by the ruling party to scrap the presidential term limits?
I have told you this before, Paul.
Rather, age limits, yeah.
I have told you this before that for me, ideally, frankly, I do not have a problem, for example, coming up with an amendment scrapping the age limit. Nor do I, in fact, have any problem for having probably removed the term limits. Ideally, I do not have. If, in fact, that is done democratically and is done voluntarily by people who are in a position to make that determination. What I have problems with, if in fact that move is meant to benefit some particular individual, and this particular case, it seems apparent that this is for the incumbent president, Yoweri Museveni. This is the problem. They have a point, his supporters have a point that yes, perhaps people who are 75 and above are being discriminated against. But you know what, Paul? There are even other situations which are even worse. You are talking about a Uganda, actually, where you can only become a member of parliament or run for president if you have an education. And this is a foreign education type of system. You have higher school certificate, 13 years or its equivalent of education that in fact is even carried out in English, the English language, which happens to be a national language, so to speak, but in fact is an official language, not a national language, because what percentage of Ugandans actually can speak English? I don't know why they don't look at the manner in which majority of Ugandans who do not have that standard have actually been disfranchised. To me, that should be more urgent than the people who are 75 and above.
Okay, let's go to another commenter from Zambia. Sizale Yvonne Chitandelesu wants to know, what do you think about Western countries what do you think Western countries have a hand in nurturing dictators in Africa? What can the civil society and the political parties do to strengthen the rule of law in their countries?
First of all, of course, it is civic education, and people at least to be aware of what their rights are. I think part of the problem, frankly, in Africa, part of the reason we have dictatorship and what have you is simply because there are only a few people who are educated, who are socially and politically aware, either of their rights or privileges or both. Because at the end of the day, the best security can only come about if the majority of society are educated well enough to know how they need to be governed and by who they should be governed. The problem right now is that we haven't changed much really from the days of colonialism. We do not have. You know, Uganda, a man like Museveni should have been smarter, probably just as smart, in fact, as the late Ethiopian Prime Minister Meles Zenawi. Meles Zenawi inherited what otherwise you would call a feudal type of system, because they had emperors who were presiding over an empire of Ethiopia. And then later, of course, you had Mengistu Haile Mariam, who introduced a dose of socialism or communism or both, and had to introduce a republic and a presidential system. But guess what? Mengistu, Meles Zenawi changed that by, in fact, introducing the parliamentary system. Because parliamentary system, you become a prime minister who is head of government, and you have the same power. If you have a president, and then you have a president who is ceremonial and commander-in-chief of the armed forces. Nobody complains about how many times somebody can become a prime minister, because you are not chosen nationally. You do not run nationally. And therefore, there was no need for you to even steal elections to be as an individual. You are chosen by your political party or a coalition of political parties which win elections and have to choose one among themselves to be the first among equals to be prime minister.
Shaka, let's go to Cameroon. Stephen wants to know why President Paul Biya, the president of Cameroon, and one of Africa's deadliest dictators, these are his words, not my words, is mistreating the Anglophone-speaking people of Cameroon?
I don't know whether he's mistreating the Anglophone people of the Cameroon alone. I am sure he's probably mistreating the vast majority of the citizens of Cameroon, but probably in different degrees here. You're talking about a man who, by the way, can be best characterized as a Nyampara of Western interests, and in particular, when you look at Paul Biya, you're talking about French interests. Nyampara is a Swahili word which translated would mean supervisor or foreman of the natives. And that is characteristic of dictators on the continent. It's not only Biya. We talked about Yoweri Museveni. We can talk about Paul Kagame. We can talk about Theodore Obiang of Equatorial Guinea. We can talk about Robert Gabriel Mugabe of Zimbabwe. There are so many on the continent.
Shaka, I have a personal question here. It's coming from Ayuka Ayamba from Cameroon. He Googled you and he says, I understand that you've been a soldier within the Ugandan army. Now my question is, what made you drop out of school to join the armed forces? And then why did you change your mind to leave the army?
I was a very, very young man and naive, and I grew up watching cinema, and I looked at the Pistro, and I liked it. And it seemed to me, frankly, the only institution I could see that could give me unfettered access to the Pistro and good uniform and some sense of power was the military. And once I went there, I was very lucky because I learned a lot of things, either by commission or omission or both. And eventually, I looked at the circumstances, especially the political, that came about as a result of Idi Amin having seized the power. And you know, the sense said to me, either you have to self-destruct or grow up. I'm glad that I chose the latter. Left Uganda, came to the States, went to school, and here we are.
Shaka, finally, what are you talking about tomorrow on Straight Talk Africa?
Tomorrow we're talking about something that it is on your heart or at your heart. We're talking about startups here. We're talking about startups and how they could very well be the future, frankly, of the continent, despite, by the way, that the continent has incredible resources. But these startups, my friend, could make a huge difference, especially to empower the younger people who are demographically and increasingly becoming the majority on the continent, and yet they have no jobs, they are not invested in the status quo.
Well, on that note, thank you all to all our Facebook followers from around the world. Shaka Extra Time is a place where you come to ask questions every Tuesday. Thank you so much, Shaka, for being a great guest. I look forward to seeing you on another edition of Straight Talk, Shaka Extra Time. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome.
Yeah.
to put aside. I know what these families are going to go through, and we need to be there for them. We need to find that we are stronger, and we cannot allow this terror to win. I yield back.
Well, I too want to just say, you know, I remember the day Jana and Jennifer and I saw you in a coma, and to see Steve Scalise standing right here, it really is a miracle, and it is just, it's really good to have Steve back, and so we just feel so blessed. You know, I also know we are all just reeling from this horror that we witnessed in Las Vegas. As we speak, we have a lot of people in the hospital right now fighting for their lives. Parents are grieving for their children. This is just awful. We cannot let the actions of a single person define us as a country. It's not who we are. Instead, what truly defines us are the acts of heroism we witness after the tragedy. Kevin just told you about the man who shielded his wife. There are just hundreds of stories of people looking out for one another, strangers helping each other, first responders rushing in to shield people, people lining up right now today. You saw the pictures to give blood. This is what America is, people helping each other. This healing process is going to take time, but we have to remember that we are all in this together as a country. Just Steve being back here today, it's evidence of the power of miracles, of the power of prayer, of us healing and getting back together. Our fellow citizens need both these things right now. They need to heal, they need to grieve, they need to pray, and we need to come together. And it's just important that we reflect the fact that our hearts are with them. This is not a good day because we had an awful day 2 days ago, but we will have better days in the future because our country is resilient and we will overcome this. Any questions?
What can you say to Americans who just want to know how the body you lead can make them more safe in the face of shootings that seem to be getting more frequent and more deadly? Yeah,
I think one of the things we've learned from these shootings is that often underneath this is a diagnosis of mental illness. This is why we spent years working on mental illness reform, Congressman Murphy's bill, and that's why the House of Representatives passed landmark mental health reform just a year ago. That law is now being implemented. So I think it's important that as we see the dust settle and we see what was behind some of these tragedies, that mental health reform is a critical ingredient to making sure that we can try and prevent some of these things from happening in the past. So that's just one example of the things that Congress has done to make sure that we can try and get ahead of these problems.
So then was it a mistake to make it easier for mentally ill people to get it done?
Nicholson.
We rolled back the proposed rule allowing for Social Security to cross-check people whose benefits are being paid to third parties because they're considered mentally defective. To allow that cross-checking to go with the NICS background. Yeah, there were people whose rights were being infringed, and that wasn't just. It's a little more complicated than you're describing. You don't think that goes in the opposite direction what you just said, though?
Protecting people's rights was very important, and that's what that issue was all about.
Last question.
Yeah.
Do you expect the Sportsman's Act with the gun violence to floor, and do you personally?
That bill's not scheduled now. I don't know when it's going to be scheduled. Right now, we're focused on passing our budget. By the way, we're bringing our budget up this week. I don't know if you knew that, but we're bringing our budget up this week. The reason we're bringing our budget up this week is we want to pass tax reform because we think that's one of the most important things we can do to improve people's lives. That is our present focus, and the Sportsman's bill is not scheduled. Thank you.
Ah, no. Thank you. You can't leave him behind.
Well, I think it's not a
On the House floor, the first of two votes. The previous question vote here, wrapping up. The rule vote next on a measure that would ban abortion after 20 weeks and make it a crime for anyone to violate that ban. They'll vote on the rule next. That's a 5-minute vote. The rule would provide for an hour of general debate on the bill itself, and we expect that to be coming up shortly as well. On Capitol Hill today, the first of what we expect will be 4 hearings with the former CEO of Equifax, Richard Smith, testifying today before a subcommittee of the House Energy and Commerce Committee on the hack of 145 million Americans. Here's a look at some of that hearing. We'll show you as much as we can as that vote continues.
I want to turn to what Equifax is offering consumers in the wake of this breach, specifically the free credit lock service that is supposed to be introduced next year. We've been told that this free credit lock service could require consumers to consent to Equifax sharing or selling the information it collects from the service to third parties with whom the individual already has a business relationship for marketing or other purposes. Is that true?
This product will be a web-enabled, mobile-enabled application that will allow a consumer, at the time he or she, if they decide they want access to credit, can simply toggle on, toggle off that application to give the bank, the credit card issuer, the auto lender access to their credit file to approve their loan.
Well, by agreeing to use the Equifax's lock service, will consumers also be opting into any additional marketing arrangements, either via Equifax or any of its partners?
Congressman, we're trying to change the paradigm. And what I mean by that is this will be in an environment viewed as a service, a utility, not a product. There'll be no cross-selling, upselling, or any products available to the consumer. When they go to get and sign up for the lock product, it's a service to them, and that's the only service they'll be able to get.
Now, will Equifax give consumers an easy and free method to choose not to share their data in this way, even if the consumer already has a business relationship with the third party?
Yeah, Congressman, I'd envision as this evolves over time, the consumer will have the ability to invite into their world who they want to have access and who they do not. It'll be their choice, their power, not ours to make that decision.
Now, last week, the interim CEO announced that by January 31st of 2018, Equifax would make locking and unlocking of a person's Equifax credit report free forever. A credit report lock is already included in Trusted ID Premier and other services like credit monitoring and identity theft insurance. Will that still end after 1 year?
Congressman, a couple of differences. Number one, the product we offer today for consumers protects the consumer at the same level of protection they'd get January 31st. The difference is today is a browser-enabled product or service. The 31st of January, it'll be a application, much simpler and easier for the consumer to use. The protection is largely the same. So they get this free service when they sign up for 1 year. At the end of the 1 year, effective January 31st of 2018, it goes into the new lock product.
I guess, the difference, other than not expiring, between the credit report lock that is part of Trusted ID Premier and the credit locking tool that will be available in January, why not just extend the freeze program?
There's a difference between the freeze product, which was came to pass with FACTA back in 2003, passed into law in 2004. That is now governed by state laws in all states, and it's a cumbersome process for a consumer. In many cases, some states require you to mail in your request for a freeze, and then we must mail you a PIN. So your ability to get access to credit when you want credit is encumbered. A consumer could go to a car dealer or to a bank to get a credit card, forget his or her PIN on a freeze product, have to go back home, look for the PIN.
On this vote, the yeas are 233, the nays are 184. The previous question is ordered. The question is on adoption of the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Gentlelady from New York.
Mr. Speaker, I request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
And the House of Votes moves on to the vote on the rule for a bill banning abortion after 20 weeks. Would make it a crime for anyone to violate that ban. The proposed bill provides exceptions for rape, incest, or to save the life of the mother. 5-minute vote here, and we expect an hour of general debate, provided the rule passes here in the U.S. House. Later today, they'll take up a couple of other bills dealing with children, government programs focused on children, those coming up on the House floor later this afternoon. The U.S. Senate gavels back into session in about 20 minutes or so at 2:15 Eastern. They're focused on a number of nominations, federal nominations, over the next couple of days. Follow the Senate over on C-SPAN 2. I want to let you know, too, we covered today the first of 4 hearings this week with the former chair of Equifax, Richard Smith, today testifying before our House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee. Tomorrow he's before the Senate Banking Committee, and on Thursday before the House Financial Services Committee. Tomorrow's hearing begins at 10 a.m. Eastern, Thursday's hearing at 9:30 Eastern, and both of those hearings you can follow over on C-SPAN 3, online at cspan.org, or on the free C-SPAN radio app.